World War II survivals, top 10 incredible journeys. When fighter planes and ships were downed by their enemies in World War II, it didn't always mean the death of every person aboard. Sometimes a few people survived, but found themselves stranded behind enemy lines. With no one searching for them, they were forced to find their way back home on their own. Some of the people who made these journeys went through unbelievable experiences, and they made it back alive. 7. 5 Americans on a lifeboat sailed through a typhoon. Calvin Grafe, a prisoner of war aboard a Japanese vessel, was cooking rice when he heard his captors in a panic. U.S. ships had found them, but this wasn't the rescue he dreamed of. The U.S. ships had fired torpedoes and destroyed the Japanese ship with Grafe and other prisoners of war still trapped on board. Grafe survived by clinging to pieces of the wreckage. Soon, 4 American POWs who'd escaped picked him up on a lifeboat and helped him aboard. The men made a rudder for their boat by breaking up parts inside. Then they sailed west towards China. Their trip took them through a typhoon and over 480 kilometers of ocean. In the end, Chinese fishing boats took them to shore, fed them, clothed them, and sent them home. 6. Japanese soldiers walked through 16 kilometers of crocodile-infested waters. In January 1945, Japanese soldiers were forced off Ramree Island by a troop of invading British soldiers. 1,000 of the men escaped, fleeing through a swamp. They thought they were going to make their way to safety. Instead, the men began a 16-kilometer trek through a swamp infested with crocodiles. The blood of the injured soldiers lured the crocodiles in. Meanwhile, the men struggled through as crocodiles emerged out of nowhere, grabbed the men, and dragged them under, never to be seen again. The soldiers fired their guns wildly every time one emerged, but it didn't stop the crocodiles. One by one, the men were dragged into the water by the hungry animals. By the end, only 400 of the 1,000 men who'd entered the swamp made it out alive. 5. A plane crashed into a jungle filled with cannibals. In May 1945, a plane flying over New Guinea crashed into a jungle. The pilot, who couldn't see past the clouds, just flew into the side of a mountain. His mistake killed 19 of the people aboard and left the last few survivors stranded 260 kilometers from civilization. A tribe living in this jungle still used Stone Age technology, and rumor had it that they were cannibals. In time, the plane crash survivors were spotted by the tribe. The survivors were terrified, but they had no choice but to offer a greeting and hope for the best. To their surprise, this tribe of supposed cannibals just flashed them a smile and then helped to feed and protect them. Meanwhile, U.S. paratroopers staged a rescue. The lost crew was found and flown out of the thick jungle on gliders. 4. A Chinese sailor drank shark blood to survive 133 days at sea. Poon Lim was a steward on a British ship traveling to Suriname when Germans attacked the ship with torpedoes. Lim grabbed a life jacket and jumped overboard just seconds before the ship exploded. He was the sole survivor. Lim climbed aboard a raft in the wreckage and then set out on a grueling journey alone. After the rations on the raft were gone, Lim became so desperate for water and food that he actually tried to lure sharks to him. At one point, he killed a bird with a knife he'd fashioned from a biscuit tin. Then he used the dead bird to lure a shark to his raft, bashed the shark's head with a jug, and drank its blood. Lim passed by several US and German vessels, but was ignored by everyone. Finally, he was spotted by Brazilian fishermen, who brought him ashore after 133 days at sea. 3. Prisoners escaped from a Soviet camp and walked 6,400 kilometers to India. Slavomir Rawitz spent 2 years in Siberia as a prisoner of war. Then, with the help of the camp commandant's wife, he and 6 others escaped. But their trip to safety wasn't easy. The men left during a blizzard and had to wander through the Siberian Arctic, living off what they could catch or find. When they made their way out of the Siberian Arctic, they were stuck traveling through the Gobi Desert and then the Himalayas in their desperate journey to the safety of India. By the end, they had traveled 6,400 kilometers and lost 3 men. 4 of the men survived, though, after traveling through the harshest environments in the world. 2. An American prisoner of war stole a Nazi plane and flew it to Holland. When Bob Hoover was trapped as a German prisoner near the end of the war, he saw an opportunity to escape. A German fighter plane had been left unattended, so he took it. It wasn't until Hoover was in the air that he realized how insane his plan was. He intended to fly to Holland, but he realized that he would undoubtedly be shot down when they spotted him in a swastika-adorned plane. As soon as he saw an open farmer's field, Hoover touched down. Dutch farmers charged at him with pitchforks, believing he was a downed Nazi pilot. Hoover tried yelling to them, but they couldn't understand. It seemed like the end until a British army truck drove over. Hoover yelled, "I'm a Yank." The British soldiers translated for the Dutch farmers and took Hoover home. 1. A soldier spent 9 weeks traveling through snow with 1 foot exposed. As Jan Balsrud's ship was attacked by Germans, he and his crew realized that they couldn't win. Hoping for nothing more than a few more enemy casualties, the men lit a fuse, jumped overboard, and let their ship explode. Balsrud swam to shore and watched as his crew was rounded up by German soldiers. When they came for him, though, he shot 2 of them dead. Then he fled through the snow. Balsrud was wet, missing a boot, and trapped in frozen lands. For 9 weeks, he traveled through the cold. His bare foot froze, and he had to cut off his own toe to stop the spread of gangrene. He was hit by an avalanche and buried under snow for 4 days. Still, he dug through the snow and made his way to a group of villagers who carried him to safety on a stretcher. Jan Balsrud survived.